not to be outdone, his son, Khufu, went just a little bit larger. The Great Pyramid, the singular Great Pyramid, was built as the second pyramid with fleet sloping sides ever constructed in Egyptian history. Pyramid construction peaked with the second one. This is for a variety of reasons. Perhaps it simply became unmanageable to continue to build pyramids at this scale, and they needed to cut back just a little bit with each successive generation. That seems pretty likely. At the very least, outdoing this pyramid would have stretched state resources beyond what would have been possible. And so they simply had to reduce what they could do. What survives today really is just the interior of the pyramid. The exterior would have been coated in limestone with a gold cap. All of that is gone, quarried to build later buildings in Memphis, to build the city of Cairo, which is now where the pyramid is. But what survives is still pretty incredible. At 2.6 million cubic meters, or 92 million cubic feet, and 481 feet high, or about 446.7 meters, it is a truly massive monument. Again, if and this is also one of the world's truly great tourist attractions, and for a reason. Once buildings of this scale, Khufu's pyramid, Khafre's pyramid, Neferu's pyramid, they're less buildings and more human-made mountains, structures that defy what is impossible for people to do, especially people whose most advanced tools were ropes, pulleys, boats, and copper chisels, which is basically all they used to construct these. Khufu himself, though, is an oddly enigmatic figure. We know almost nothing about him besides this pyramid. In fact, there's only one other artifact that depicts Khufu in any meaningful way. It's this statue on the left. It's about 2 inches high. I actually find this kind of charming. The pharaoh known for building the largest structure in Egyptian history, one of the largest building built before, I think, Lincoln Cathedral in the medieval period, is known only from a statue that would fit in the palm of your hand, which is just, I don't know. Yeah, I think it's kind of charming. But it also means we don't know very much about his reign. Later Egyptians regarded him as a tyrant, kind of a foolish, unwise king. But we don't know whether that's true or whether that's just propaganda from later dynasties wanting to paint a king who had done a lot to, aggrandize himself in sort of the opposite light. So there's very, very little to say about him. I also just want to show up on the right briefly what the interior of the pyramid looks like with its sort of grand vaulted chambers. There's a lot of architectural innovations because we're going through all pyramids. You can't really do it now, but just in how the roof of the burial chamber is constructed with interlocking beams and that kind of thing to prevent the roof from collapsing down on the sarcophagus under the weight of millions of cubic feet of stone. One of the big questions, of course, that comes up with any structure of this size, but especially the Great Pyramid, is how did they construct anything like this? Because it turns out, unsurprisingly, that getting a 2-ton stone block 450 feet up in the air is not very easy. One of the big proposals, of course, is that they would just use a ramp. And almost certainly that's true. It is far and away the most efficient way to move rocks up a big structure. However, the question of how this ramp worked was also rather difficult for a time. Some people had proposed a sort of like ramp sloping out. They would drag things up, as you can see on the bottom left. However, as you can also probably see on the bottom left, that ramp would be impossibly large. There would be more material in that ramp than in the pyramid itself, and it would stretch into the river. So it would be simply impractical to have something like that work. So instead, the solution that was proposed recently, and that seems much more likely, certainly much more efficient, is that the ramp wasn't separate from the pyramid. There was sort of just a ramp-shaped indentation going around the pyramid that was filled in at the very end. And this has the advantage of being physically possible and also not particularly hard to pull off. It probably would have been pretty intuitive to the builders that that's how you would have wanted to do it. And so almost certainly that is how things took place. Um, it's hard to get exact traces of this in the archaeological record because obviously this ramp would have just been built in top of and incorporated into the structure. But in the absence of good archaeological evidence for other ramps, and given that the Egyptians didn't really have access to particularly large cranes, and especially that they didn't, have any other real effective way of moving these blocks along, it seems like the thing that would make the most sense.